This is Sarah Levitt with the Making Magnificence Project, and today my guest is Dana Bourne, Brigadier General, Air Force, retired, and currently serving at Harvard's Kennedy School of Government. Dana Bourne, welcome to the Making Magnificence Project, and really welcome back.
Thank you, Sarah. It's great to be back with you. I mean, it seems like it was just yesterday when we last spoke in person in 2014.
It's real. So yeah, so when as we were chatting before that official interview began, when I looked back and I saw how much time had elapsed, it really, because we've been in touch, and it really shocked me. So this is a 5-year retrospective interview with a little bit of leeway added onto it. So given that it is, several years since we've done our last kind of official conversation for the project, bring us up to speed on what you've been doing, what the focus of your work is at Harvard. Let's start there.
All right. Well, thank you, Sarah, and thank you for what you're doing. And obviously, it's been not 5 years since we've been in touch. You're just terrific about staying engaged and nurturing the relationship as we are all trying to make a positive difference in this world. So thank you for what you do. This period of time since we last spoke has been one of a lot of transition. And I suspect I'm not alone in that because we've all been having to, the word pivot, right, comes to mind, is how do we transition or pivot to what is now the new normal or the novel normal. The last time we spoke, I was talking about transition with you in transition from the military to the civilian sector. 30 years in the United States Air Force to, becoming a faculty member at the Harvard Kennedy School. And now I'm thinking about transition in a different way. We just moved from our home in the Boston area to our home in the DC area. And the pivot has been a little bit more of transition to this virtual environment that many of us are finding ourselves in, where it's an imperative because we have no choice, right? In terms of we have to continue the learning and the leading journey, given these circumstances. It's even more urgent. And so it's fun to be thinking now about that, what is ahead? What are we going to be talking about 5 years from now?
Yes.
And how are we going to be making a positive difference in each of our lives in the way we're living, learning, loving, and leading?
So let's dig in just a little bit to your work at Harvard with leaders and executives. Tell us about that and kind of, let's, before I pummel you with too many questions, let's start there, just kind of about the work you're doing with leaders at Harvard.
Well, we're in common cause with that. Primarily, we're about developing people as leaders, individuals, in terms of exercising leadership, creating that social impact and adding value. And my primary responsibility currently at the Harvard Kennedy School is chairing a program for senior executives who are really more in the federal sector, but we also have private sector and nonprofit executives who are on their way to advanced positions of authority and also in advancing ways that they can have impact for the public good. And in that, we do programs that have 75 to 80 participants for a whole month. And we've been doing that 4 times a year. And obviously, like everybody else, we've had to figure out how do we reinvent ourselves to continue the mission, given people's new lives and demands, and create a learning space. Learning doesn't stop, leading doesn't stop. The two go together. And so how do we keep that going safely during these multiple crises that we're facing? And, every day I hear somebody talk about these, we've got the health crisis, we've got the economic crisis, we've got environmental crises, we've got political polarization, we've got now global crises. The crises don't stop. And so obviously the intensity that we have to put into addressing these collaboratively is more urgent, and it's an imperative. So I've enjoyed that. It's been a really partnership with people who are in the arena to take a pause in their leading to learn, and then to continue in their leading and learning.
Dana, and your, so a couple of questions, my brain's going in several directions. So a couple different questions. So one of the things that has been a focus, I recall from our first interview, is your own dedication and your teaching of authentic leadership. And in this, is that accurate?
That's correct.
Yeah. And so in this context of, you know, the imperative of bringing learning and leading to multiple crises, is there, what does authentic leadership look like in, does it look any different than it ever did? Or is there a different angle on it given the urgency that you're talking about?
It's a wonderful question, Sarah. And when we last spoke in 2014, I was just beginning to develop a course on authentic leadership at the Kennedy School, working closely with Bill George, Scott Snook, Nick Craig, people that are advancing, developing authentic leaders. What I can say is, in teaching and evolving in my own teaching and also research on authenticity, it has become even more important. And I can say, because I've been doing research at the Harvard Kennedy School for the last 4 years across the business school, in the private sector, and with the Kennedy School and with government officials, that it actually does have impact that is important in terms of our own well-being, but mostly our effectiveness in what we're trying to do. So how I have been growing in terms of my thinking about authentic leadership, it's one that is, I guess, more certain that the half-life of importance of who we are and why we are is way more important in our immediate future than knowledge and skills in leadership. Knowledge and skills are being superseded by machine learning, artificial intelligence, augmented intelligence, and the human capacity and social capacity of who we are and why we are, both individually and as organizations, is going up. And so the fact that the research that just came out in 2019 shows that research on authenticity has doubled in the past 2 decades. And it's across management, marketing, psychology, and sociology. These are in the management annals, right? There's merit to the reason that we're enamored with authenticity. It's because it matters, and individual people matter.
So Dana, so yeah, let's kind of, so what is, how do you kind of think of, define, and try to live authentic leadership? And where does authentic leadership converge with meeting these urgent kind of crises? So let's start, you know, what is authentic leadership?
Yeah, I actually do an exercise in the programs that I work with people to say, okay, authenticity, authentic, it's overused, right? You Google it, you get 1.5 billion hits, and it's growing every day. So there's a reason that we overuse that term. But if we used another term, what term would you use? Most people say,
are you asking me, Professor?
Oh, sure. What would your answer be?
I'm like, are we in class?
Sure. What would your answer be? I'm interested.
You're so funny. I thought you were legitimate. And I'm with you. I think you know, it's funny. Authentic is overused, and it's a very specific word. So it's unfortunate that it's overused. Are you really asking me what I think authentic is?
Sure. What word would you give? There's no right answer, obviously.
True and congruent to oneself, kind of connected to the inside and then coming to the outside with that.
Yeah. Oh, that's wonderful. And, you know, true, congruent. I love the word congruent. To me, it's also integrity, because congruency or integration, it's pulling all facets of who we are and why we are together into integrity, which is, if you're an engineer, you know, integrity is like the strength of a beam, you know, integrity is also the strength of who we are. And I also think there's a word in there that is not what a lot of people would use for authenticity, but if you look it up in the dictionary, the word's original. And,
Interesting.
yeah, it is interesting. And I had to play around with that, but I like it because there's reasons that for all of the research we've done in leadership, there's no one style, there's no one personality, there's nothing that we can say, this is what you need to be and do, and then you'll be successful. It's because we're so complicated, we're so complex, and we're also so unique and distinctive. So it's really harnessing the originality of each of us that has value in what we're trying to do in this world and be in this world. And so originality, I like that word. If I can share a quick story.
Please, yes,
Right.
yeah, please.
It's somewhat overused, the word authentic, but originality really sticks with me because we talked about mountain climbing and how much I love mountain climbing, and our girls now like to mountain climb as well. And I have a poster signed by Sir Edmund Hillary, first man to summit, right? Everest. Now we're reading the news, it's sort of like a traffic jam trying to do that. But he signed a poster for me well before, he's gone and may rest in peace. But he signed a poster that said, Dana, keep climbing, Ed Hillary. And my daughters love that poster. And I could give them each a nice, beautiful copy of that. But, the original one has a little bit more value.
Yeah.
And so
yes,
I like the word original. I think it's not overused, and it really gets at what we want people to do and embrace who they are, the journey they've been on, and how do you harness that for your effectiveness in your life and in your leading.
And so what would you say to a leader? How does that matter to meeting the current circumstances in which we are coming out of and in which we are kind of going into? Because when you and I were first talking, 2014, we had many conversations about VUCA, volatility, uncertainty, and we have just come through a heck of a period and are in it. To your point, there are multiple crises. So how does authenticity, originality, being true, integrity, wholeness, how does that work in leadership to better meet the demands of what's in front of us?
Well, I just really admire your line of questioning. You're really getting at some of the key issues. And I think one of the reasons we're seeing an explosion of use of the term authenticity and an investment in developing people in their realness, their congruency, their originalness, is because the world is speeding up. This VUCA environment, I'm on boards, and I know, many of us are recognizing that, to talk about a long range plan 10 years from now is sort of like, why bother? That there's so much that's going to change.
Yes.
Let's focus on the long range plan. The last 10 years is actually 3 years or 5 years in the future. So in thinking about that, I use and I know that other colleagues too talk about how authenticity, or really our grounding in our values, our ethical principles, our character, our self-awareness, all of that is really a stabilizer. It's like the centerboard of our vessel as the waters and the winds are whipping around and you can't see where you're going. And I think that that's one of the reasons that it's of increased value for us as we're thinking about trying to create change. And that gives us that compass to be able to navigate what are really tumultuous, quick changing, even beyond Moore's law kind of environments that we're trying to lead change in.
So tell me if I've got this. So it helped that kind of connection for leaders, for all of us, to who we are, values, what makes us us. That connection is kind of an anchor in the storm.
Yeah, anchor doesn't capture it for me, because an anchor holds you in place.
Yes.
And I think we're really about accelerating innovation, change, agility. Yeah. But in that, we have to have something that keeps us vectored so that we're not just being thrown around in the storm. And so I think it's more of a stabilizer is the way that I see it. and helping us to stay on course and make adjustments, but not go too far off course. And one of the things that, I mean, in the military, we talk about, you know, fighter aircraft versus, or as, you know, compared to cargo or bombers. You know, if you're a cargo pilot or a bomber and you're a little bit off course, you can sort of correct and you can get back on course relatively easily because, you know, you're moving at a slightly slower pace. But if you're in a fighter and you're going supersonic and you're slightly off course, you can get way off course really quickly. And so decision-making cycles, you can think about that, and how do you make those decision-making cycles, and at what speed do you make those decision-making, and what do you base that upon? You know, I think that we're more in a fighter environment right now. And so how do we kind of make sure that we're our compass isn't demagnetized and that we're really staying on course?
I love the analogy or the metaphor of the different types of planes, because you've said the pace of change, and I'm with you on this, the pace of change is a bit brisk and more brisk. So I'm hearing a couple of things, Dana. So when you think of leadership in your own life and career, and then what you're observing in these executive leaders who are coming to Harvard to learn with you, what is the same about leadership? And so you've named a couple of things that are different. So pace of change, multiple crises on multiple fronts. I'm hearing that might be a distinction, but so I'd like to explore that. What might be the same, and what, if anything, might be different?
Yeah. Okay, I had to check my notes here because I like that question. You gave that to me in advance. So yeah, I think what has stayed the same, I'll start with that one, because what has stayed the same, I think, goes back to a John F. Kennedy quote, which says, leadership and learning are indispensable to each other. And obviously we go back a ways, but I embrace that because I often say, you know, if we have ever stopped learning, then we should stop leading, right? I mean, it's really, especially now, we have to be curious. We have to have wonderment. We have to lean into the more we know we don't know. And so I think that has not changed in terms of that really great quote, leading and learning are indispensable to each other, or learning and leading go together. What has changed, I think, and I alluded to this a little bit, and that is that the emphasis on what many of us grew up in terms of, you know, learn in education, and learn in terms of skills, and practice. That education and training model, one, was based upon deficit. So, you know, Sarah, if you need to get 100%, you know, and you get a 80 or 90%, you know, you got to figure out what don't you know, you got to be perfect, right? So you got to get that 100%, and you're driving for that. And it's kind of like silly, because first of all, none of us are perfect. The other is some things you only have to be good enough in. The other thing is it focuses in on maybe weakness. And the other part of that is knowledge and skills are being superseded by machine learning, augmented intelligence, artificial intelligence, and in medicine, in finance, in legal. I mean, you name the field, you know, we can't keep up. And so the half-life of knowledge and skills, they're still important, but the half-life of the who we are, like our be component, the Army uses be, know, do. So know and do are maybe not as prevalent as now how important the be part is. It's our ethics, it's our character, it's our social skills, it's our self-regulation, self-awareness, what motivates us, it's our support social skills, it's all the EI, EQ, emotional intelligence, you know, and that's even more important. Unfortunately, you know, that's also sometimes hard stuff. It's the soft stuff, but
I
it's the hard stuff.
I joke like we're calling this the soft. Yeah.
No. I mean, and it's also, there's colleagues of mine, Joe Nye, for instance, who talks about soft power. And I know many people are aware of that when we're looking at a lot of global diplomacy issues, soft power, it's soft power. And a lot of the research shows that even in the technical work, when it comes to, do we have unmanned bombers? Do we have, systems that in medicine that have no human in the equation? Most people would say, no, because of a lot of things, we have to have the human in the equation. But what makes the human valuable in the equation is those softer skills, that EQ, IQ, morals, ethics, character. So I would say that's changed.
And that, so if I want to make sure I'm tracking, Dana, and you're saying like the necessity of those skills and their relevance is different than they used to be.
Absolutely. I think that that ties back into our discussion about authenticity and originality, and why maybe the research is showing that that is exponentially going up. And I think that's part of the answer of why it's going up, is it's becoming more important.
Yeah. You mentioned curiosity as a quality in leadership. It's something that I look for as well. What are you, so in your own life, I want to go into Dana Bourne's story. What are you curious about right now? What's on your radar?
I think I'm sort of at a launch point. I've been curious a lot about character and leadership and the impact of that together. We often talk about leadership and that process of influencing, and that's important. And there's a whole lot of research that shows that's important to organizational outcomes we care about. And we talked about this before, things like performance, satisfaction, people retaining in an organization, and people being altruistic and helping out, with colleagues and things like that. And I've, the research shows that character also matters in that, and not individually. Like you could have somebody who has great, strong character, but who isn't capable of influencing in a leadership way. Or you can have someone who's really strong in influencing, but maybe doesn't have the character component. And so what we have found is that the combination of leadership and character is really impactful, both high for good outcomes that we just discussed, performance, altruistic behavior, satisfaction, etc. But also when you have low, it has disastrous impact on our organizations. I've kind of evolved with my colleagues to thinking about, how do we measure that in another way, in terms of the gap between sometimes us knowing what the right thing is, like moral reasoning, and moral action, actually behaviors that show that we are demonstrating what we're thinking about. And so we've come up with some measures now to try to think about things like moral maturity. And I've also been doing a lot of work with philosophers of going back to, because there's nothing new under the sun, right? So going back to what did we learn from the great ancients like Aristotle, Socrates, Plato?
You'll get no argument from me, Dana. I was a philosophy major. You'll get no argument from me. I'm like, yes.
So then what does that mean for thinking about the 21st century? And I've really started to also mine moral leadership from a qualitative sense of how do we learn about, particularly focused on military people who have gone through some really challenging times over this last decade of moral purpose and moral leadership, and how events have impacted on our way of thinking about that. And so we've been studying that from a qualitative perspective. But I'm really more interested, I guess what I'm learning about now is I'm really trying to learn about beyond that into the national security space of how some of this is applied within some of these crises. So whether we look at energy or education, looking at technology and digitization, environmental issues. And so I'm really trying to stretch a little bit more into learning about some of the challenges in some specific national security imperative areas and applying it there. So I guess I would say that's really the growth zone for me right now, or the grown zone, as I don't know a lot and I'm trying to learn a lot, but connect the dots between the two.
So you are, so you're living what you are, you're living and breathing what you are also kind of researching and teaching. What would you say to, so, as you know, so executives, I'm just thinking of, clients who are so incredibly busy. I mean, leaders are so incredibly busy. What is your advice to leaders? Because you've mentioned the link many times, and I'm with you on this, the link between kind of leadership and learning, and the JFK quote. What would you say to leaders who are feeling like they don't have a minute in the day? Where does the learning happen, and what vehicles are most effective, have you found?
Boy, you're speaking to, I think, everyone who's listening, right? We go from meeting to meeting to meeting, experience to experience to experience. And oftentimes it's like we feel as though, I mean, I've used the term, like a gerbil or a hamster in that little wheel, right? And is there a chance to jump off and then get back on? And it's sad because really there's not a lot of agency in that. And there's a lot of learning that happens. I'll share with you a colleague, Dov Seidman, who is the founder and chair of the Howe Institute for Society. And I've had a wonderful opportunity to work with them over the last year and a half as a fellow in moral leadership. And he often talks about the pause. And when you hit a pause button on, your computer or your television or your phone, it stops. But when you hit the pause button on us as humans, it's actually where we start. And
love that.
I know it resonates with each of us, but there's something also in the field of adult development, human development, that says that within the experience, so let's just go back into the meeting to meeting to meeting, there's an important element of what is challenging for us, and also with the relevant level of support. In other words, you don't want to have too much challenge. You get paralysis if you don't have enough support. You don't want to have too much support and not enough challenge, or we're not growing. We love to grow as humans and, feel that connection with other people that we're growing together. And so we want high challenge and high support to be able to learn and grow. So within the experience, always nudging ourselves to the right balance of challenge and support, and for others as well. But the other thing is the two bookends of being ready for the experience, being rested, being present, being fed, being, prepared, whatever that is. So being ready is important on the one end. And after the experience, having the reflective time of, okay, what are we going to do now? How are we going to be different? What are we going to do differently? That's still very compelling, I think, for all of us. The challenge we have is, how do we build that into choice and intentionality in our practice? And who's going to hold us accountable to that? And, as a coach, this, right? And yet it's like telling a dentist, telling somebody to floss their teeth, right? How are you going to change the behavior? I know I need to do that. Right. Actually build that into a daily practice.
You've mentioned, I want to get into your own story a little bit too, kind of take it from the macro down to Dana's story. But before we go there, Dana, so is there, you mentioned the grown zone of learning, is there kind of a learning edge right now that you see among senior leaders across industry? Kind of a grown zone where...
Great question. I had to think about that for a moment, but it actually resonated with me, because I think I'm still going back to this somewhat of a level of burnout that most executives are experiencing. And I'm actually, I'm sensing from global executives, so doesn't matter the industry or the sector, that same thing in this COVID environment. And I think that the reason is because there is this new understanding of integrated life. And for everybody, there's this challenge of our workforce, including ourselves and our own environments, of having your Zoom environment, your work environment, your home environment, your community environment, everything comes together in a way that it's really difficult to, what many people have used as coping in the past, has been compartmentalization.
Yes, yes.
And that's worked very well. Well, truth be told, integration is actually the future of how do we distinctively pay attention to the integrity of people's lives in work, in community, in family, and in taking care of themselves. And so I think integrity and that integrated life is what I would say is a key theme, and it goes back to originality and authenticity.
And Dana, so kind of riffing on that, what does, in an ideal, the future we're going into, what do you think that integrated life looks like, where it's not, to your point, as compartmentalized,
Yeah, I think I'll share with you a study that I was just, two studies that I was just able to be part of. One of them is with the National Academy of Sciences. We put together a committee that was focused on the use of the terms generations and generational categories. I mean, we all use them, we read about them, they're, Gen X, Gen Z, and for whatever reason, they're useful for us because they're shortcuts, right? I know what a millennial is like, right? And our charter, sponsored by the Army, but for broader interests, was to find the science. What is the science behind the use of generational categories? And we didn't find evidence for these generational categories. Most of the things that we found dealt with either age, period, or cohort changes. And we were able to make some recommendations for further work in these areas. But it really led us to some recommendations out of our committee report to say, we really need to pay attention to, Sarah, what is it that's important to you? And what are important aspects of your work environment that we can not take a shortcut and just assume because you're a part of a certain generation that you either have this or have that, or want this or want that. And so I think it's calling upon us all to have more seeing the humanity in everyone, and taking a bit more time to be open to what I call radical listening in our approaches and in our policies, to be able to enable individuals, but also organizations.
I've been saying for a little while, my sense is, so when I'm seeing, I'd be curious, and I think this is echoing what you're saying, but I'd be curious if you're sensing this or seeing this, Dana, is I think the genie is out of the bottle with regard to kind of the flexibility and autonomy that people were forced to experience. And I don't think that genie is going back in anytime soon. It might be modulated or modified or adapted, but you're not, And so I think that question is at the forefront, and part of one, leadership is to your point, what does an integrated whole life look like rather than a compartmentalized one?
Absolutely. And there's so much work being done in this area, in design thinking and things like that.
Yes.
And to your wisdom in highlighting this insight about flexibility, the other project I was part of was out of the Howe Institute for Society, looking at human connection over this past year.
Oh, wow.
And really large sample. And really the findings are somewhat disturbing, but igniting in terms of a couple of things. But one is 44% of people reported basically feeling less connected over this last year. And as humans, there's two things that are important for us. One is that social connection and feeling connected. and the other is growing, being enriched and having this opportunity to be in that the growth zone, and advancing in some way, learning new things, and developing. So unfortunately, the data shows that people that were even more impacted in terms of feeling less connected were women, people under 30, and also people who were in more independent roles. So they weren't part of maybe a work team. And the good news is, because I'm a eternal optimist, right?
We share that, Dana.
Yes, we do. It's a sisterhood of, the glass is half full. But we're realistic too. These are challenges we need to face, but we're hopeful. But the other finding was that people who were seen as moral leaders actually were able to mitigate those concerns. And some of the behaviors that they exhibited, one very important one was flexibility, and working flexibly with people who had different life situations in terms of childcare, elder care, moving, health challenges themselves, hours they wanted to work or could work because of where they were located and where the headquarters was. But flexibility was clearly one that links to seeing the humanity in everyone.
When you say is moral leadership character driven? I want to make sure I'm understanding. Is that character driven leadership? What do you think of when you're saying moral leadership?
It's sort of not morality. I mean, Dov Seidman is also a philosophy. He'd be a compatriot for you in conversation, and we share just a respect for a lot of Aristotle's work. It's more it's like being values-based, living from purpose, a lot of those things that are, it's not just about, a fixed thing of there's a moral person or there's an immoral person. It's not that. It's really more foundational pillars and practices.
So let's turn to your own kind of leadership journey, because you've had some really extraordinary experiences, Dana. So let me start with, who and what do you think most influenced your own kind of moral leadership? Who and what most kind of shaped you along the journey? And I guess who and what experiences? That's my question.
So I can start probably with the experiences first. And it's going to probably not surprise you, but sometimes surprises others, but it's the experiences where I failed. And I think it's because I became more hungry to learn and grow in those experiences. They were painful and soul searching and, the dark night of the soul kinds of experiences. And you don't like to be there. And so there's a lot of trying to figure it out. That doesn't mean that some of the really high moments of, team success, organizational success, that those aren't just absolutely wonderful and they keep us going. But the true transformative moments were transforming through, trauma, which have been personal and professional. So experiences is probably one that I would say has been most fundamental and transformative. The question who comes first and foremost to the closest to me. So I would say family and dear friends and my own faith, where I know that we have multiple people that draw strength from various forms of faith, but that's been formative for me and also helpful in how I have tried to advance. I wear a spiral because a spiral is not, I don't like downward spirals. I like learning upwards and growth.
No, I saw it. It's beautiful. Yeah.
And sometimes, we have to fail forward. Sometimes we have to have a setback to be a comeback. And, that's part of life. But ultimately, we're trying to go to some learning level, a higher level of performance and meaning and contribution and everything. So the who starts there, but I would say that there's a 360 in the way I would answer that also. I've learned so much from young people who were entrusted to my leadership, who became mentors for me, and helping me see things differently. I've learned from peers who have been in the journey together, or who have kind of shared with me, good examples, bad examples. We've kind of leapfrogged together. And then from supervisors, supervisors who I have wanted to emulate certain characteristics, and those that I felt pain through, that I had to understand what was that, and what do I not want to exhibit. And so I'd say from a 360 perspective, it's been like benefits from every direction.
You mentioned kind of, in your own leadership journey, the experience of kind of a dark night of the soul, which I think so many, if not all leaders, I don't want to say all because it's a big statement, but I think many, many leaders experience that as kind of being, to your point, a very difficult experience, but one that ultimately shaped you for the better, for yourself and for others. Is there one in particular, Dana, that you would want to share that you feel was really kind of transformative, and then how you found your way through? Because the dark night of the soul is no fun.
It's not. And I think that I shared with you in our last interview, because it was prior to, it was probably still a bit raw, but in 2014, I think I was willing to share that with you. And it was one which I think is natural for almost anybody that feels as though it's personal, like this challenge I'm going through. You feel as though as an executive, you've got the bullseye on your chest, and it's really hard to get outside of that and look back in a objective way, and also to not lose sight of your responsibilities and get beyond yourself, basically, to look at what it is you're called upon to be and do for the greater purpose, the greater vision, the greater mission that you have been entrusted with in life and in leading. And so I one in particular, I guess I felt that bullseye. And I remember saying to somebody who was much more senior to me, and it took a lot of vulnerability to say that, to say, I don't feel worthy to hold the position of authority that I'm currently in, given these, allegations, or given this, what I thought was just a really dark night of the soul moment. And that individual, again, much more senior to me, began to share some of their own dark night of the soul, sharing stories. And when they shared their vulnerability, because I held them in such respect and still do, even more so, their own vulnerability, when they leaned in to share that, I looked at my own challenges and sort of went, I think I shared the term with you before, I said, I got nothing. I mean, mine seemed so little, to compare, but I never knew that they were shouldering also. I was shameful, I was embarrassed, I was feeling like I was failing. And out of that, I felt a little bit more agency to say, you have to get out of yourself here and get beyond this and focus on, your mission, and, and really recognize that this is part of the learning process, and part of the leading process, and part of the responsibility you've been entrusted with. So get over yourself, get back into the game. You're supposed to be doing. So, and I'm always in one, right? Because if you're in the growth zone, if you're leaning forward, trying new things, you're going to have failure. And, I got in 2017, I think I earned the Harvard Kennedy School Innovation and Teaching Award. And I was shocked. And as I was listening to the dean, while I saw my picture up in front of the faculty, esteemed faculty, reading through the citation, I remember thinking to myself, first of all, well, my team did that, right? But then the second thing was, good on the Kennedy School for recognizing that a lot of the things that we tried were abysmal failures, but some of them were wonderful successes. And they were recognizing me, but really our efforts for innovating and being willing to try new things. And they valued that, and they were valuing basically those that worked as well.
Something tells me you're being humble, but
no.
So Dana, this is actually an interesting, so when you're in the dark night of the soul, right, when the winds and the waters are swirling around you, how do you think, how do you make decisions about when to let something go and say, okay, this didn't work? To your point, you were just talking about, wow, we tried several things, we innovated, some of them didn't work. How do you discern when to say, okay, might be time to call it quits, or might be time to tweak and turn the plane a bit and continue on and continue innovating?
So the advice that I was given, that I value even more so today, here we are many years later, like over 9 years later, I've given to others who have found it also very valuable, and so I pass it on. But the advice that was given to me was to think about yourself as an executive outside of the dark night. Think about being beyond it and looking back at yourself in the middle of the storm, so to speak, and being successful, and not saying or doing something that you would later regret in that part. And then that creates a golden thread from in the middle of the tornado and the darkness, right, where it may be quiet and you may be alone.
Yes.
But you know there's stuff swirling.
Yes.
To get outside of it and know that thread, looking back, I found that to be incredibly helpful, because it's very easy to say or do things out of what might be, survival mode, as opposed to thriving through it mode. And that's important.
So to your point again, kind of stepping outside of it a little bit gives you a different vantage point than the crisis may be generating in the moment within us.
And I have colleagues at the Kennedy School that are teaching adaptive leadership, and there's some terminology that they use that's very effective. Like, you have to get off the dance floor onto the balcony. And because on the dance floor, you may be feeling as though, you're right in the middle of the dance. And you go up onto the balcony, and you'll see, man, you're over in a corner, right? And everybody else is over there having a great time. So you somewhat, that's another terminology, I think, that gets you to kind of get outside of it a little bit and take a broader perspective.
I'm mindful of our time. I always have more questions than there is time for, but one of the things that I think is kind of among many that is unique to you is that you write poetry. So if you could share with us kind of what that means to you, just as a person and as a leader, if there's any connection there at all.
Wow, you're digging deep into my secrets. I do love to write poetry, and actually I'm so inspired because I now watch my mom writing poetry and my brother writing poetry, and I really admire friends who write poetry. And look at Amanda Gorman, our Harvard Kennedy School graduate, the hill we climb at the inauguration and of the president of Harvard and also of our country. I guess what poetry means to me is I started to write it because it was my way of writing lyrics, and I didn't feel as though I could hold a tune. And so
I love it.
I could come up with the words, which was a strength, but I couldn't really sing them very well at the time. And it also, I think, was a type of reflection. Like, we talked about how important reflection is, and taking that time of pause. And those are both, I think, two important leadership connections. It started for me at a very young age, but I didn't make the connection to leadership at the time. Now I do. One is that focusing on your strengths. What is it that you're good at? Not focusing on the fact that I can't hold a tune, or I didn't think I could, right? I found out I could if somebody sings on tune in my ear, but it drove me to write poetry because that was something that, you know, I could do. And the second thing is that it's not only, it's a reason to reflect, it's a reason to take a pause. It's a reason when you're sitting down journaling or writing poetry or something, or doing woodwork, or, you know, playing a music, and it's a pause moment, which is a reflective moment, which is so critically important for us all.
Yeah. Yeah. I love the kind of the connections, the links you made to leadership, and particularly on that, it's that kind of quiet pause, contemplative, reflective time where you're not churning on, you know, brain is in a different place. Yeah.
Exactly. And, you know, I didn't have this understanding, but I remember when I was working on my dissertation, you know, in grad school, and I was so stressed, and it was all in my head. And I took time to go basically take a bath. And
Yeah.
I had an epiphany. Right?
Yes, the Archimedes effect. Yes.
Yeah, I mean, how many people in the shower or on a walk, or, you know, so there's something that is part of that pause where we actually, you know, start. That's of great value.
I'm with you. And I know for many achievers, you know, it can be hard to take that pause, but I know for me as well. I mean, I'll be on a run or on a walk, and there's the idea for my next blog, and I'm not thinking about it. It just drops in. Yeah, it's a similar kind of.
Excellent.
So two last questions. So since our last interview in 2014, do you have a perspective on something or insight on something that may have changed within yourself or within leadership that you didn't then?
Yeah, I had to look at my notes there too to make sure. Yeah, there's one insight I've had, and, you know, it's because of, you know, another challenging reflective time just recently that I, I'm embracing more. I've always intellectually embraced it, but now it's in my heart. And that is how important it is to ask for advice and to ask for help. And we don't do that. I don't do that because number one is, you know, this fear of maybe I don't have it all together, or I don't know the answers, and I don't want to bother somebody. You know, what are they going to think? You know, am I imposing? And yet, when somebody asks me for help or asks me for advice, I love it, right? I feel as though I must have something to add that's of value.
Yeah.
I become connected in a way to that person where I start to be invested in what it is they're trying to do.
Yeah.
And it's really wonderful. So why don't I do that more? And asking for help, like not assuming that I really do understand something, but really trying to lean into curiosity to say, what is it about this that doesn't make sense to me, but maybe it does make sense in some other way that I just don't understand yet. And so I would say asking for advice and asking for help, reaching out more and radical listening to others has been a real big lesson for me this especially past year.
Such an incredibly difficult year. Yeah. To your point, on multiple fronts, for sure. So in the time that we have, I'm starting to mix it up a little bit with a new question for the Making Magnificence project, because this is the Making Magnificence project. And so I want to conclude with, what does magnificence mean to you in your own life?
Magnificence. I love the fact that you are doing this project, and magnificence I see as sharing leapfrogging because we're really helping people learn from each other, people who don't even know each other, in a community to listen and learn from each other, and to kind of not have to, go through this alone. That support network you're providing is magnificent in and of itself. I think about, so there's a virtue of magnanimity, and two of my favorite virtues are humility, because of sort of the tie into the virtue of service and coming from humility, and magnanimity. And I think two of them are really important in terms of, from a place of being small, maybe even thinking about it from, President Lincoln is someone that I look to in terms of lessons from Lincoln, in terms of maybe being small, not that he was small, but, being humble and creating an inordinate amount of impact. That's what magnificence is to me. And I think it does tie to, going back to this place of being humble, being a servant leader, being small in many ways, in order to ripple effect an inordinate amount of magnificence of impact in the world.
Gorgeous. That's beautiful. Thank you, Dana. My guest today has been Dana Bourne, Brigadier General at the Air Force, retired, and currently at Harvard's Kennedy School of Government. It has been a joy.
A true joy always to be able to see you and to be in common cause together. Thank you for what you do, Sarah, and for your infectious, joyful laugh, and also for your just generosity of spirit and your friendship.
Thank you.